Is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with me tonight Congressman Tom Price, who, besides being a United States Congressman, is also a board-certified orthopedic surgeon.
Hey.
So it's my pleasure to have you here tonight, Tom. Welcome.
Thanks,
welcome,
Joe Sam.
welcome.
Good to be with you. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, maybe we can have a nice chat tonight about some of your journey through life, how you arrived in Congress, and what some of your observations are on the American healthcare situation. So.
Sure.
Let's see, are you a Georgia boy, or how did you...
Actually I was raised in Michigan, went to the University of Michigan undergraduate medical school, and then came down to Emory University to do my training in what I thought was going to be trauma surgery.
Really?
And then fell in love with orthopedic surgery, completed my orthopedic surgery residency in the early 80s.
Yes.
Met my wife, who was an anesthesiology resident at Grady Hospital in Atlanta.
Yes.
And then we moved to Roswell, and I opened up, I started a solo practice in orthopedic surgery. And practiced orthopedic surgery for 20 years, grew it into what is now the largest private group practice of orthopedic surgeons in the country. We're surgeons orthopedics.
Wow. That's quite a story. Now let me ask the question about the Michigan football team. Do you have any comments about that? Or are you?
Well, we're happy to have gotten rid of Rich Rodriguez, and think we've got a quality coach in Brady Hoke, and if they can keep Robinson healthy, we might be able to compete. So.
All right, now a few football questions. Dare I ask your football allegiance now? I mean, are you going to give me a nice political response to that? Which team do you follow now, or?
Well, our son is a senior at Vanderbilt. So,
okay, all right, the Commodores. All right, well, okay, that's reasonable.
Where our SEC heart lies with the Commodores right now. However, we root for the Bulldogs and the Jackets.
Okay,
and,
that's good, right?
And actually, the Kennesaw Owls up in my district. I represent the 6th district of Georgia, which is northern suburban Atlanta, has portions of Cobb, Fulton, DeKalb, and Cherokee counties.
Yes. Wow, and the Owls, that's the local...
That's the Owls, that's Kennesaw State, which, as you may or may not know, is the 2nd largest university in the state.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You know, I wonder about a more ferocious name. Owls doesn't sound too ferocious.
They're very wise, very wise.
Well, that's good. Yeah, so you actually, you had your experiences, and you elected to sort of go into a political direction. How did that happen? I mean, not every doctor does that. And
well, Sam, I enjoyed so much taking care of patients. I loved the practice of medicine.
Yes.
But I recognized at some point, as I know you did in your practice, that there were a lot of folks involved in the state legislature and in Washington who were making decisions about what I could do for and with my patients that I thought were adverse, and they had no clue what it meant to practice medicine or how you took care of patients.
Yes.
And so in the mid to late 80s, I got involved in kind of helping local candidates run for office and become involved in the political process. And over a period of about 10 years, it just so happened that some of our best friends became elected officials because we tried to help them do what they were doing. And one thing led to another, and I was asked in 1996 to run for the state Senate.
Yes. Well, that's an extraordinary, I guess, decision. I mean, there's such an enormous, I guess, issues with time and just circumstance and family arrangements. That's quite a big decision to make.
Well, they didn't tell me the truth.
What did they not tell you?
They said it wouldn't cut into my practice at all.
Really? You were a little surprised about what actually happened.
The fact of the matter was that I got involved, was elected in '96 to the state Senate, served 4 terms in the state Senate, 3 in the minority and 1 in the majority. In fact, I became the first Republican majority leader in the history of the state Senate after the 2002 election.
Wow.
And then I found myself working 60 hours a week at what was supposed to be a part-time legislative job, and said this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in 2004, we were fortunate to have the 6th congressional district open up when Senator Isaacson ran for the U.S. Senate. we threw our hat in the ring, and we were victorious in that. We are now serving in our 4th term in Congress.
Well, kudos to you. And I mean, you've really accomplished something. And I think if I can ask this question, I think you have a substantial leadership position too, do you not?
I serve on the Ways and Means and the Budget Committees now, and I'm also chair of the Policy Committee, which is the 5th in line in the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives.
Well, that's a big deal. So you're right next to the, I guess, the wheel that controls the country in a way. I mean, it's a big deal. And your experiences, your earlier life experiences have given you ideas and perspectives not every congressman has. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. I think physicians actually have a unique perspective and capability in the area of the political arena. Certainly from a healthcare standpoint, but also because our approach to problems tends to be much more logical than the political arena.
Well, we'd like to think that, but I mean,
well, you know, we collect data. We determine what the hypothesis is, what the possible diagnosis is. We outline a list of things that ought to be done to treat that diagnosis.
Right.
We put them in place and then test whether or not they're actually working to get the patient well. If they're not, then we change course. I oftentimes posit to folks, wouldn't it be wonderful if that's how we solved policy challenges in our country? Because we certainly don't. But that's the scientific method of solving problems is tried and true.
Well, you know, I'm happy to hear you espouse that, but I'm out here in the provinces. We're a little concerned about what goes on in our nation's capital. And there does seem to be a fair amount of sophistry and knavery that we see, all sorts of, people we're not sure should be there. I think that's a thing to say. Is that a problem? I mean, just in general, do your colleagues respond to logic and rationality, or not always?
It all depends on the issue, but the Congress is a representation of the country, and it truly is. It's a remarkable institution, and the founders were brilliant in their conception and what they put together. Now, I think that one of the problems we have right now is that folks aren't concentrating on truly solving problems in a positive way that sticks to those fundamental principles that I believe made us the greatest country in the history of the world. Had a lot of folks with new ideas and different ideas about how we ought to be doing things, what the role of the federal government ought to be, which really is a fundamental question that we've got to answer right now. What is the role of the federal government? Is it to expand and become ever far-reaching into the daily lives of American citizens and businesses, or is it to say, no, we believe that individuals ought to have the greatest amount of opportunity and live their dreams the way they believe appropriate? I certainly fall in the latter category, and that's what we're fighting for.
Well, you know, that's kudos to you. Just to ask this question, we're at sort of our country in many ways, I won't say we're at a crisis stage, but certainly there's a lot of, fear, concern, just in the average American citizen is just wondering what's going to happen. There are a lot of economic issues, there are a lot of health care concerns out there. And just to ask this question, is some of what's happening in Congress, are people just paying attention to being reelected and political jousting and fundraising, or do they really pay attention to the issues that you spoke about?
I think it's a bit of the former, but it's more the latter. And Joe Sam, we're at a very, very difficult time and challenging time in our nation's history. But we're a very divided country. Consequently, we're a very divided Congress. And what has to happen in these periods in our nation's history is we need to work through it in the electoral process. In our history, it usually takes 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 election cycles to work through that, and we're in the middle of it right now, and it's very uncomfortable. People, you mentioned the word fear, and people come up to me now and they use that word unlike they've ever used it before. I'm afraid for the future of my country. I fear for what my children are going to have to put up with in our nation. And so that's the challenge that we have, is to put in place a system or preserve a system that allows for the greatest amount of opportunity for the greatest number of individuals. And that's the challenge that we have in healthcare and others.
Now, just to ask one question, at least it seems to me, as one just looks at the acrimonious, tension that occurs in Washington, there is this fragmentation of national, psyche. Is some of this referable to the way the congressional seats are arranged? In other words, it appears the dominant party often are gerrymandering districts so that a person would wind up in a district that is a predominantly Republican or Democratic district, and then would be unable to take a more neutral, conciliatory, appropriate viewpoint for the country's welfare.
Well,
any thoughts?
I think the gerrymandering redistricting process that we've just been through in this state and across the country because of the 2010 census always has some poster children for districts that ought not have been drawn that way. I would suggest, however, that one of the reasons that we're so polarized from a political standpoint is that the law of the land dictates that certain districts can't be equalized in terms of their political representation. So you can't have districts that are 50-50 Republican-Democrat performance, if you will, because the law says you can't do that for a variety of reasons. And that's wrong. But that's Washington, again, inserting itself and attempting to pick winners and losers, in this instance, in the political process, as opposed to allowing the system to work.
Yes, well, you know, I think it would be an important step forward, in my opinion, that congressional districts just be arranged in the most, I guess, reflecting the geographical reality of citizens. I mean, around the central town, and where congressional representatives could, I guess, have a constituency that was a more balanced one. I'd say that.
Yeah, actually, that's against the law in many areas right now.
Why is it against the law? If I could
because of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act precludes the ability, says that states cannot decrease the percentage of minority population in a given district. And if you can't decrease it, even though that percentage is decreasing in the state, which is consistent with what's happening across most of the Southeast, you can't decrease it in those districts. So the law dictates that you cannot equalize those districts. It's a poor application of the law, and I think it has distorted significantly the representation in Congress and actually erodes the ability of individuals to elect folks that are more toward the consensus building as opposed to the extremes.
Well, has the time come for a more realistic view in regards to the 1965 Voting Acts? It's been almost 50 years. And we have an Afro-American president. I mean, I think everyone believes that minority rights will be well protected. Wouldn't those rights be better protected if there was a generalized equilibrium in regards to district allocation?
Oh, I believe so, strongly. But the Congress just a couple of years ago reaffirmed and renewed that Voting Rights Act for another 25 years. We're stuck with it right now, and it is there are things there are reasons that it was put in place, appropriate, and corrections were made, but right now it is destructive to the ability to have districts represent a more homogeneous portion of the electorate.
Yes. Now, Tom, we talked a little bit earlier about fear. So we have all these, and to me, it's almost an un-American word. I mean, I think the nation has distinguished itself for a sense of self-confidence and moral authority and ability to just shoot those three-pointers whenever we need to. And there is a lot of distress out there. A lot of it revolves around the American healthcare system. And I mean, they have all these issues and problems, and we're now facing an extraordinary change in the way that healthcare is being delivered. And I know you've been enmeshed right in the middle of that process. Can you make some comments about that, or what's happening, or what's going on?
Yeah, a couple of major points that I'll make, and then happy to address any specific areas that you'd like to talk about. One is that the current system, the status quo, is unacceptable. It doesn't work for patients. It doesn't work for physicians. It doesn't work for folks trying to get access into the system. New Medicare patients can't find a Medicare doctor taking new patients. The affordability is becoming more difficult. I would suggest that the quality is actually decreasing right now in our country for a variety of reasons. So the status quo is unacceptable. Now, the left in our country attempted to address this over the past couple of years by introducing and passing and signing into law a very expansive piece of legislation that will tell every single American citizen what kind of health coverage they must have under penalty of law. So that you must, as an American citizen, purchase health coverage that Washington says you must. And if you don't, it's a violation of the law, and there will be a penalty. That to me is un-American. I believe the individual mandate portion of that is unconstitutional, and I think the courts will ultimately find it to be unconstitutional and toss that portion out. The problem is that doesn't solve the challenges that we have, because again, the status quo is not working for anybody.
Yes.
So what we need are positive solutions.
Yes.
And there are wonderful positive solutions that can get to what I refer to as patient-centered health care.
Yes.
We can get folks covered in this country. You can't have 30 to 50 million folks out there walking around without health coverage.
Yes.
The system
Yes.
just doesn't work.
Yes.
So you got to get them covered. There are wonderful ways to do that without and making it so that they can select the insurance that
Yes.
they want
Yes.
for themselves and their family, not that the government wants for them.
Yes.
And then, secondly, you got to address the insurance challenges, portability and pre-existing.
Yes.
You ought not lose your insurance if you change your job or you lose your job. That's just crazy.
Yes.
And you ought not be priced out of the market if you have an awful diagnosis or an awful injury.
Yes.
The good news is that you can fix both of those things without putting the government in charge,
Yes.
right? So portability, how do you fix that? You let people own their coverage regardless of who's paying for it.
Yes.
So that if they change their job or they lose their job, they can take their insurance with them.
Yes.
And in terms of pre-existing, how do you make it so that regardless of your health status as an individual, you can afford health coverage?
Yes.
You allow millions of Americans to pool together,
Yes.
not just high-risk pools,
Yes.
but millions of Americans pooling
Yes.
together so you get
Yes.
the purchasing power of millions.
Yes.
Then one more individual into that pool, regardless of their health status, doesn't significantly affect the cost to everybody else.
Yes.
That's how you fix the pre-existing challenges. And then finally, you got to address the lawsuit abuse issues,
Yes.
which the bill didn't do at all.
Yes.
The practice of defensive medicine, which are the tests and the examinations that you do, that I did, that every doctor does, in order to be able to, if they ever find themselves in a court of law, look and stand in front of the judge and the jury and look them in the eye and say, I did everything. I did everything. When in fact, as you well know and your colleagues know, that everything isn't absolutely necessary in order to either make the diagnosis or treat the patient. That costs about $600 billion a year wasted. Wasted dollars. Healthcare dollars in our country. That's about $1 out of every $4. So we have in our bill, H.R. 3000 is the bill that we proposed, that would fix the coverage challenges. You can get folks covered. You can solve the insurance challenges. And you can solve the lawsuit abuse issues, all without putting the federal government in charge of a thing.
So you actually have a bill that you're introducing to put these. Now, is that possible? How does that comport with the Obamacare legislation that's there? I mean, is that what does that mean? I mean,
well, the first thing that our bill does is repeal Obamacare, because you got to repeal that bill. It is built on a foundation of a flawed premise, and that is that the federal government knows best. That it can tell you exactly what to do for you and your family as it relates to health care, and that's wrong. That's simply wrong. So we would repeal that piece of legislation and reform our current system, which is unsatisfactory right now, with a system that, again, I call patient-centered health care, that gets folks covered, solves the insurance challenges, and addresses the lawsuit abuse issues.
Now, I know that this is not the right time or place to criticize the American people. I don't think you stay in Congress long if you do that, but I'm just going to, I have the privilege of just making some comments. You know, I think there are responsibilities involved in health care. I mean, what I've heard are the ideas about rights. There's a health care right, and it's, in fact, one of the questions that was asked, I guess, in the Obama-McCain presidential debate, is health care a right or is it a responsibility? And I think President Obama said it was a right, and Senator McCain said it's a responsibility. But actually, isn't it some of both?
Sure.
And the two go together.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, don't we have to create a culture of responsibility for your individual health situation? And you have any comments about that? I mean, should you have some responsibility about what you do and don't do? And,
absolutely.
And maybe some kind of penalty. If you are not compliant, or you're doing this or doing that, maybe your health care should cost more. I mean, if I could throw that thought out.
Well, I prefer carrots instead of sticks, because I think that's that brings about the wisest
So you don't want to be too mean to the constituents.
No, what I want is more freedom and more liberty. And freedom and liberty comes from options and choices for individuals, so that individuals recognize that it makes more sense for them to be covered from a financial standpoint for their health challenges than not. So look, we're a compassionate country. We want to make certain that every single individual in this country has access to the highest quality health care. We're also a country that believes in individual liberty and individual freedom, and that's the beauty and the wonder and the awe of America. And what's right for you from a health care standpoint and what's right for me from a healthcare standpoint may be completely different.
Yes.
And the federal government doesn't recognize that difference.
Yes.
And that's why the responsibility and right is yours to have the kind of health coverage that you want, and mine to have the kind of health coverage that I want, and every single citizen to have the kind of health coverage that they want. But it is not the role of the federal government to dictate to you what you must have.
And I think a particularly worrisome thing to me is I think the so-called Gang of 15. After the structure is put in there, a lot of the issues, particularly with Medicare, you may know more than I know about this, but a lot of the decisions are going to be mandated top down about appropriate treatment algorithms. And that's very worrisome to me. And I would say, I would use the word un-American.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're referring to is the Independent Payment Advisory Board, or the IPAB, which is a 15-member panel. This was passed in the bill.
Yes.
15-member panel, appointed by the president without any confirmation by the Senate. No requirement that there are any doctors that sit on that panel. And this panel will be charged with the ability to determine exactly what you can do for and with your patients. That's wrong. That's simply wrong. And so I don't think the American people are going to tolerate that. That doesn't come into place until 2014. But I tell you, we're going to fight and make certain that it never breathes a day of existence in this country.
I'm going to raise my voice slightly, if I might. I think that's a wicked kind of thing. It's wicked because it's a star chamber kind of arrangement. And all of the science and statistics and data and efforts to improve health care, I mean, that's a very complicated kind of thing. And it requires a multifactorial, balanced approach.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't have doctrinaire, barriers to people obtaining appropriate care for their circumstances. And that's a very worrisome thing.
You're right, Joseph.
And I don't believe the American people are going to accept that once they tangle with exactly what the situation is.
You're right. Because, again, what's right for one individual with a given diagnosis is not necessarily what's right for another individual with that same diagnosis. And what we want, the system that you and I, and I believe the vast majority of Americans want, is one that allows that individual the right to make those decisions, not the federal government. What we're talking about is the definition of quality health care. Who's going to define, who are we going to allow to define that? And if we allow the federal government to define what quality health care is, I tell you, we all lose. We all lose, because quality can only be determined by the patient and the family and the physician. That's where quality can be determined.
Can I squeal a little bit about this? It seems to me a lot of the debate, and I think you brought up the issue of quality, a lot of the debate is focused on cost control. And I think insurance companies and government, when they make a comment, well, I don't think we're going to allow that joint replacement, it just costs too much. But the actual benefit the patient receives is not appropriately assessed. And things are focused so much on the actual expense of what occurs. The true benefit for the procedure is not in the equation.
Exactly right. And that's why you can't allow the federal government to be the entity that defines what quality is, because it won't fit for anybody. Then it would be a one-size-fits-all, and it would be a disaster.
Right. I'm just going to make one or two more comments here along these lines. Some of the things that disturb me are trying to use all the data, the medical data out there to construct treatment algorithms about the best way to do things. And it appears to me that a lot of what's going on now is these treatment algorithms, they exist, plans to do something, and they occur in federal programs right now about what the government will or will not allow. And they also occur in insurance companies about what they will or will not allow to have happen. And the problem is these algorithms don't see the light of day. We don't have a free discussion about how they were created, how they're being changed, who created them, what's the data behind there. And I really fear there is not appropriate scientific data to back up many of the ways that healthcare is being denied these days.
No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. No, and that gets to the key of where these decisions ought to be made.
Yes.
And I would suggest that the federal government is incapable of making the right decision for you and your family as it relates to health care, and for me and my family, and for everybody else out there. The only individuals that are capable of doing that are patients and families and doctors, and that's where medical decisions ought to be made, not in Washington.
Right. And another thing, I'll just say things that disturb me a little, is the idea of the American healthcare system are compared to other countries and how meritorious the other countries' healthcare system would be. it's almost like the model would be, what about some Paradiso in Central Europe? Well, let's pick Poland in 1950. Now, there was a great deal. Everybody had equal access to health care. You could line up at the clinic.
Sure.
Everybody was treated the same. But what were the results that actually occurred? And a lot of the markers for appropriate health care, I think, have been skewed by people that want to skew the comparison.
Sure. Well, they're not comparing apples and oranges. Infant mortality is a classic one, and the folks on the left always want to cite this. You know, we have these awful statistics supposedly on infant mortality. Well, it's a bunch of bunk. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of countries that the Institute of Medicine looks at in terms of infant mortality begin recording that an infant is a live birth, oftentimes at 1 month, 6 months, even 1 year of age. Whereas in this country, we determine a live birth at the moment that child is born, at the moment that child comes out from the mom's womb. And so you're comparing apples and oranges. They also use all sorts of parameters that have nothing to do with health status. One of the classic ones here in this country is whether or not you have health coverage, health insurance. Well, the fact of the matter is that even if you don't have health insurance, you oftentimes, most often, get very high quality health care when you go and deliver your baby. And the fact that you don't have health insurance counts a remarkable number of points against you in the Institute of Medicine equation. So it's a bunch of nonsense. They're not comparing apples to apples. And then they're then putting that information forward to the public, and the public thinks, oh my goodness, we've got a terrible healthcare system. Well, that's nonsense. If you have a health challenge right now in this world, or you have an injury right now in this world, if you're in the United States and you're within proximity to a major health institution, you've got the greatest chance of surviving than anywhere else in the world.
And I think every big boy in the world knows that and tries to get here.
That's exactly right.
I'll make one other comment. I think some of the errors these statistics make is the absence of appropriate subcategorization. So let's say we have a tubby, I don't know, whatever, 70-year-old American, and many of them are quite tubby. They need to be compared to the 70-year-old tubby Japanese, if one could say that. But instead, there are different cultural patterns that promote health in other countries. I mean, and so I think if those vectors are put in there, we'd have a whole different appraisal or opinion about the American healthcare system.
No, you're absolutely right.
And the slander that goes on is just absolutely terrible.
And that's what it is. It's slander. If you look at the top 5 cancer survival rates in the world, for the top 5 cancers, we're number 1 or 2 in the world in this country for the top 5 cancers. Not Western Europe, not other countries that are touted as being way up on that list from the Institute of Medicine. Slander is what it is. You're absolutely right.
Well, Tom, it's been great having you
Joe,
here.
Sam, thank you.
But I'm going to give you one last comment. I mean, anything you'd like to say to those people in this part of the country about their lack of confidence or fear or concern? Are you guys going to throw a punch for us up in Washington?
Look, I tell you, as I mentioned, we're at remarkably challenging times. But the question we need to answer as a society is, what is the role of the federal government? And so I would challenge and urge every one of your listeners and folks watching this to get out and get involved in the political process. Elect individuals that you know will make the right decisions, responsible decisions as it relates to what your state government's doing and what your federal government is doing. We live in the greatest country in the history of the world. There's no reason why we can't continue that as long as we stick to fundamental principles.
Well, hoorah, as they say. Thank you so much for coming.
Take care. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.